I'd like to thank Yvonne for organizing this panel and inviting me to participate. When I saw Yvonne's call for papers and read her first question, quote, how do contemporary painters who use even the smallest amount of representation negotiate the play between when or how much to depict and when and how much to let the material itself or its manipulation be emphasized? What content or questions guide those decisions? End quote. I started thinking about the shift my non-objective paintings had gone through during the last 6 years as a result of a subtle change in my process. Before delving into that shift, I should start by discussing the process I had been using to develop my compositions since 2009. While working on the painting, some characters have more history. I felt that the composition didn't feel resolved. At the time, the painting consisted of just the left panel. I decided to trace that panel and mirror it on the right in complementary colors. That seemed to fix the compositional issue and led me to repeat the process in not quite equal and definitely opposite. I continued to use the accumulated tracings and the process of tracing in various ways in subsequent paintings. For example, in amalgamation, I used the tracings from Some Characters Have More History and Not Quite Equal and Definitely Opposite to create the composition. In paintings such as Gaining Momentum and The Whole is Greater Than, I directly painted one side of the painting first and then traced and mirrored the paintings in complementary colors. However, in the two curved end panels of The Whole is Greater Than, I used the tracings from the central 6 panels to build the compositions and then painted them identically. In paintings like Don Quixote's Folly and Recycled, I only used the tracings to bring in certain moments from previous paintings to fill and activate small portions of the composition. Finally, I did a series of paintings which includes these 3 works: Mesmer, Intermittent Lucidity, and Precarious. I traced each painting as I completed them in small 10-inch by 10-inch squares and recombined the tracings to create the next composition. So Mesmer led to Intermittent Lucidity, and Intermittent Lucidity led to Precarious. This process deconstructed the information from each previous painting to the point where there wasn't much left to trace and transfer. When I was working on these paintings and my earlier abstract work from 2003 to 2009, I thought of them as a kind of collage in the way that I was layering and juxtaposing the various kinds of visual information I was including in the paintings. The paintings would often become paneled and broken into noticeable geometric units or grids as a result. Sometimes this happened intuitively, sometimes it happened deliberately. It was no accident, though, as I had often looked at the paintings of my graduate school director, Grace Hardigan, whose work I believe fits the topic of this panel as well. I was drawn to the way she worked with collage, which had a strong influence on the way she composed her paintings, as we see in East Side Sunday on the right. Beginning in the early 1950s, Grace's paintings had started to include references to the world in which she lived. In East Side Sunday, we can make out references to fruit stands of the Lower East Side in New York where she was living. We see baskets of lemons and limes and possibly other fruits throughout the composition. In the painting City Life from 1956, we see a similar approach and a similar subject matter, but the composition becomes denser and more packed with references to her bustling neighborhood. We can make out a vendor's cart, and possibly even the vendor in the upper right, and an awning of orange and green stripes in the upper center portion of the painting. Billboard from 1957 seems to reference collage even more directly because its images appear to be from multiple sources juxtaposed together rather than the depiction of a particular moment like in City Life. The painting Maryland from 1962 takes this a step further, breaking the visage of its subject matter into separate body parts. Another artist whose work has influenced my recent direction is Julie Moretu. Like Grace Hardigan, she uses source references that allude to the world around her, often layering and juxtaposing linear architectural drawings with painted shapes of items that might be found in these architectural settings, such as the banners and flags of Stadia 2 of 2004. However, the process of the layering in her works like Stadia 2 and Berliner Plaza greatly differs from Hardigan's process, where Hardigan broke her compositions into structured units to organize the information collected in collage. Moretu layers her imagery into a more unified singular cell. As dense and layered as her compositions get, she still allows glimpses of her sources, giving us just enough to decipher the content of the work. As I started my recent body of work in 2014, deciding how much imagery to let show through became a relevant factor in my process. I had started thinking of the tracing process as a way to use the history of the work to create new paintings, so I wanted to take that a little further. I decided to pull paintings out of my storage rack from 1994 through to that present moment to trace sections that I found visually interesting. This meant that I would have tracings of narrative figurative paintings that I did through graduate school and beyond, tracings of still life paintings I did as I transitioned away from the figure, and tracings of abstract paintings I did when I felt the still lifes were leading me towards abstraction. I was left with hundreds of tracings to choose from to create new works. He Peeks from the Corner, Everything is Fantastic, is a shaped painting that once again brings to play the symmetry that I used to organize the layered tracings. In most instances, the layering breaks up the representational images that have been reutilized in this new composition, but there were instances where I thought letting the image stay whole could add to the allure of the work and invite deeper investigation of the visual information presented. For instance, we see a semicircular rotation of a head painted alternately in reds and blue-greens in the center of the painting. An upside-down figure peeks in from the upper right. Just below the figure, we see a quarter of a diving ring toy used in swimming pools, rendered in ochres and earth tones. Just below that are remnants of a paper bag still life painted in deep blues and greens. Other parts of the painting are filled with various selections of my past non-objective paintings, stripes and drips, and even wood grain from a series of paintings from 2007 to 2009. There are also moments in the painting where I bury and obliterate the tracings, adding starbursts, painterly swirls, and other in-the-moment decisions to the collection of my traced painting history. I think of these passages as a way to combine the present with fragments or quotations from the past. As I started working on this series, I came across the book Quotational Practices, Repeating the Future in Contemporary Art of 2014 by Patrick Greeny. In it, he asserts that, quote, the past matters not only because of what actually happened, but also because of the possibilities that were not realized and that still could be. Quotation evokes those possibilities, end quote. This statement fit what I was doing in my work perfectly, quoting moments from various paintings, some never exhibited, and giving them new possibilities. And she points, he stares, we are left sifting and sorting. The title gives us some clues as to what might be happening in the painting, although most instances of recognizable imagery are obscured by the flat application of subjective color. To the immediate left and right of the center is a repeated fragment of a figure pointing downwards with an orange sleeve. The staring figure referenced in the title is a cat figurine from an earlier still life occupying the lower right corner. The diving ring toy makes another appearance in this painting and finds its way into a lot of paintings and drawings in this series. In this painting, it gets mirrored and becomes a colorful upside-down heart shape in the upper portion of the painting. Paper bags make another appearance, but this time they become more abstracted by color. Yvonne's question in her call for papers, quote, how do contemporary painters who use even the smallest amount of representation negotiate the play between when and how much to depict and when and how much to let the material itself or its manipulation be emphasized, end quote, comes into play in these moments. In the painting, a jester's false recollections of eating fish while bowling for spirituality become whitewashed. The title once again references some of the images making appearances in the painting. The jester in question appears in the center right of the lower left panel. The fish is in the lower right of the upper right panel. There are multiple bowling pins repeated throughout the painting. One is in the lower right corner of the lower right panel painted in yellow. And there are two more in the upper right panel painted in red. The word spirituality in the title references the red shapes placed around the concentric circles in the upper left corner of the upper right panel. Finally, whitewash refers to the central area of the lower right panel painted in high key tones. This was an area I was having difficulty resolving, so I did a whitewash of gesso with a little bit of color mixed in over it. Tethered hands lead to angry clouds and empty speeches while the fish watches quietly from his corner is an example of where the recognizable images become fewer and more obscured. The tethered hands of the title refer to the translated shapes and saturated colors in the lower central portion of the second panel. This was a tracing of an arm holding a rope from a painting done during graduate school. The angry clouds are slightly more obscure and hidden throughout the painting. They were originally from a large painting from 2010 where I repeatedly used the anger clouds that appear over the head of the tennis player in Wii Tennis when your opponent earns a point. The fish makes a reappearance in this painting and shows up quite frequently in subsequent works, but is more hidden and abstracted in this instance. In the far left center of the first panel is an empty purple comic strip speech bubble, which is the source for the empty speeches of the title. The titles of these works are keys to some of the tracings used in the paintings. These tracings are memories of significant paintings for my overall body of work. Sometime prior to working on these paintings, I read Moonwalking with Einstein, The Art and Science of Remembering Everything by Joshua Foer. In the book, he talks about a memory technique where one builds memory palaces, where you create rooms, often memorable rooms from your past, that contain items from the list you are trying to memorize. You place the items throughout the rooms next to memorable images that will aid you in your recall. You can then use the memorable images to create a title of your list so you know what is in a particular memory palace. As I created these paintings, I noticed I was breaking them into grids, and each unit in the grid contained one or more tracing. I started thinking of the units as rooms and the paintings as memory palaces. However, while the titles do refer to images found within the painting, they are often arranged in a way that refers to my mindset at the time. Tethered hands lead to angry clouds and empty speeches, while the fish watches quietly from his corner was completed in January of 2017 and is a subtle allusion to the way I felt after the 2016 election. Layering the tracing papers on the panels for transfer often created some nice linear moments that would then get lost when I blocked in the painting with color. I was interested in seeing what I could do with layered lines, so I started transferring the tracings onto Duralar sheets. Duralar is a translucent sheet of plastic. I used this material so I could draw on both the front and the back. I then layered it onto a second sheet with drawings on each side as well. In these works, I continued to use the same tracings, but also added new tracings taken from the paintings I had just completed between 2014 and 2018. As I worked on the layers of Duralar, I had to consider how to organize the layered line to not only balance the composition, but to decide how much of the images should remain or be absorbed in the web of lines. In What If No One Is Right, we see on the far left the tethered hands make a reappearance in the upper right rectangle. They are one of the only forms I left discernible in that drawing. In high stakes, justice sought, and where are our attention spans, the diving rings are used again in a translation across the center. The paper bags used in a couple of the previous paintings are layered so many times in the lower left quadrant that they are only slightly perceptible upon close investigation. And he said, surprise, and then he started shooting. The diving rings and a smaller ring toy are the only recognizable forms left visible. The rest are allowed to fade and blend in the cacophony of line work. What is left tangible in these three drawings, in various degrees of readability, are headlines from newspapers, both print and online. In the past, I used to collage news articles into my work, and I would often use obscure text as a compositional device in my abstract paintings from the mid-2000s, but I had different intentions for the text in these new drawings. I wanted the text to add something tangible, real, and recognizable to the drawings. I wanted to use it as a means of marking my contemporary moment while coexisting with my painted memories. I attempted to use the text obliquely, letting it exist as a part of the composition without becoming overtly political. I was interested in the way Mark Bradford used text that is so recognizable in his Constitution series, but allowed it to fade and become obscured to fit the needs of the compositions. His compositional use of text in these paintings becomes a vehicle for multiple interpretations, much like the Constitution itself. As my drawings progressed and I switched from marker on Duralar to graphite on paper, I continued to play with combining my past and my present with tracings of my paintings and news of the day. And I continued to struggle with how much imagery to depict and how to use the material qualities of the graphite to aid me in those decisions. At times, I felt like Rauschenberg erasing de Kooning's drawing as I tried to take away lines already transferred and defined. In these three examples, we see the fish and the diving rings become more prominent and faces and figures becoming somewhat readable. As I progressed through this drawing series, I wanted to bring painting back in without losing the qualities I liked in the layered line drawings. In 2014, I had mixed small paintings comprised of my collected tracings on old sketchbook pages in a way that I felt worked for that scale. The painted parts were left abstracted through the flat, hard-edged application of the color, and their placement in the composition left just enough readable information to make out the original drawing or text. However, I wanted the painted parts in the new work to feel more integrated rather than visual obstructions to the drawn portions. So I decided to physically collage old paintings into the drawings. As I have continued to work on this series, I've found the proportion of painting to drawing, or maybe more accurately, color to black and white of the drawing, to be incredibly important and sometimes tricky. Extending the drawing over the painted parts has been helpful, and the decision about how much of an image is depicted becomes more crucial. In Narcissus and Diving Rings, I felt if I let even an inch more of the portrait show, they would have overpower and off-balance the drawing. In Hair Dryers, Diving Rings, and A Partial Echo, I made a similar decision on how much of the figure to show in the collage painting. In these new works, adding a fully rendered drawing of objects from my studio not only combined the past tracings with the present, but was a subtle way to address the amount of demonstration drawing I was doing while teaching remotely during the pandemic. Snacks, drinks, and a reverberating echo pairs a partial moment from an old figure painting with the complete image of a rendered drawing of a Dunkin' Donuts cup sitting on my paint shelf in my studio. The image of the cup in its entirety helps to balance the scale and color of the collaged painted portion of the work. The transfer tracings both overlap the cup and integrate into its image as if fusing past and present. Text hasn't been added at this point, but may still find its way in. The last two works I will share are still in progress. I've tried to incorporate more collage painting fragments, but I feel the balance between the painting and drawing, image and abstraction, still needs solving. Speak No Evil, See No Evil, Faded Lights and Withered Offerings is closer to resolution, but I feel the central portion of the painting needs more abstracted line drawing to balance the ring of image fragments circling the edge. Maybe it needs a fish or a diving ring. And speaking of fish, the fish that was traced and used in many of the previous paintings and drawings was cut out of its original painting and has been collaged into this painting I am ending on. It is still unresolved, and I think it goes back to the question of knowing when and how much of an image to depict. The proximity of the drawing of the dog balloon and the painted fish could be causing the balance of the image and abstraction, or balance of image and abstraction, to feel skewed. Or it could be the prominence of the dog's visage. Maybe I depicted too much, or maybe I didn't manipulate the value and weight of the line defining the dog's contour enough to allow us to question or interpret the information we are receiving. These are the kinds of questions that are important, an important part of the process of working between abstraction and representation. Thank you.